Good day. The purpose of this guide is to take you through the SithasoDaisy low-code tool. We are going to take a tour. When you first open it, it's going to be blank like this. But what I'm going to do is to import an existing project which will come with a download. So you go there to import a project, and then we have created an address book project already that I previously created and then showed in my previous tutorials. Now, this address book, you'll be using the PocketBase backend. You can click on edit. There, for example, you'll see the details of the project itself. Now, what I'm going to do is to start the tool that has been added into this tool so that it brings you up to speed in terms of some of the functionalities that are on the tool itself. So to start the tool, you go to this particular button here, click on it, and then it's going to take us through. So what it's saying here is, welcome to the project module. Here one is able to create a low-code project. This table here will list all the projects that have been created. So let's go next. To create a new project, click on the add button. So we're going to click on the add button. Now what happens is a modal dialog appears for you to specify the project details. Here you enter your project information and you select the backend that you want to use. Say go next. For example, you enter the project name here. For example, this is address book. You select the database type here. Now remember, in our previous examples, we indicated that we can have a backend type like PocketBase, MySQL REST, Web SQL. And the example before that we did was using Web SQL. So this one is using PocketBase. So let's say next. So after specifying the required details, click here to save your project. Then you do save. Next. For now, let's close this modal dialog to demonstrate with an existing project. Please click cancel. So we click on cancel there. Now we already have an address book project that we already have. Né? So what we're going to do is to click on the edit button. Click edit. Now the name of the project here is address book. Next. The database type is PocketBase. PocketBase is an SQLite backend web server. So for example, we have chosen that one as a default. Next, PocketBase runs on a particular port. So this is the browser URL where the database will be accessible from. Okay, when you run it. Say next. Now this is the name of our project database. This makes it unique. To access PocketBase, one needs to have a unique email address or a username and then a password. So here we provide the username and the email address for the PocketBase administrator. And then here we provide the password for the PocketBase administrator also. So the password that we have configured is specified there. For example, if we click here, there's the password as indicated. So this then completes all of the project details for PocketBase. Now, one needs to ensure that the web server is running on the named port. So what we can do is, for the project, for example, that we have already created, we can open it. Let's see. We've already created this particular project. Now you get this content from the SithasoDaisy5 website. So let me just open that. Okay, let me just go to view on GitHub. So we're going to access the SithasoDaisy project repositories. Here's SithasoDaisy5. In this repo here, we have a folder called PocketBase on the source code, where, for example, if you download it, then you can just copy and paste this folder into your C drive. See, run local server dash dash. So this is the latest version of PocketBase for version 22. Yeah. So you download this and then you double click on this file here to start the PocketBase web server. So as I've already created this, I'm going to start the PocketBase web server here. Now, to deploy this, you need to be running it on a VPS machine, you know. So this is an already running version of the address book. Let me make a disclaimer now. Any information that is showed here has been generated by a fake data generator. If you'd like to see how I have generated the content, you're welcome to ask me about it. The information that is here is generated from a fake data generator. It's not actual information. If there's somebody's actual information here, it's possibly just a coincidence, but I'm using a fake data generator for this. So what we do here is this: we start the server here. It's running on that particular URL, and then it starts this application here. But we're not going to be looking at this now, because what I'm trying to do now is just to take you through the guide in terms of how this application was created. Also, this is available already on the LowCode Generator folder as the source. So as I was saying, on the tool itself, we've specified all of this information here to actually create a project that is currently running. Next. Now let's close this and continue with our tour. Now, the first step, as we already indicated, is that you create a project, and then inside that project, you need to create tables. So after we've created the project, one is to add tables to it. We have been following a database first approach in relation to creating the project, So the address book project has been created. We go and click on tables. Now, the tables that are already existing in the address book project are categories, contacts, and provinces. You'll remember in the first tutorial that we did, we created all of these, but I'm just going to take you through the guide now. So we start a new talk because we are on another page. Let's start the talk. So welcome to the tables modules. Here, one is able to create tables for their database and project. A table represents a single entity or a concept. For example, a table called users might store information about users, while a table called orders stores details about customer orders. Here, we will list all the tables that have been created for our active projects. So let's add a new table. So click here. So we go there and we add a new table. Click there. Now what's going to happen is a preference dialog is going to be activated so that we can specify the table details. Next, in a database, each table name needs to be unique. So you specify a table name here. Next, this is the name given to each item in the table. For example, a user for users collection. So it's like a singular. You call a single user a user. Next. This name is given to many items in the table, which is a plural. For example, users for a collection of users. Next. The height. This will be the height of the modal with inputs controls for your user interface. Next. This will be the height of the modal with the inputs for your user interface. Okay, let me open this and show you what I'm talking about. Again, the information that is in this video is generated from a fake data generator. Now, if you go to contacts, when you click on add, this is the model that appears, for example, here. So it has a width and it has a height. But because we're dealing with the categories, so we go to the categories, and then we go and say add. So this is the width, and then this is the height. Now we said that in our design, the width should be 700 and the height should be 50. Next. A primary key is a unique identifier of an item in the table. So it ensures that no two rows are the same. So each record in the row should have a unique identifier. Next, when activated, this will enable a database to generate a unique sequential number for a row. Like when activated, which means auto increment when we activate it. So each row in the table will have a new record. So for now, we're just explaining in terms of when you add a new table, what kind of information is required. We will also be dealing in relation to each and every table that is here. For example, we'll work on categories and just see the properties for it. Display value. The display value is used to indicate which field should be used to display prompts for each record. For example, this could be a full name of a person. Display value. If I can explain it in terms of this particular running project, if I were to click on delete here, it says confirm delete beneficiary. Are you sure that you want to delete this category? Now, that display value here is the name of this particular category here. Remember, when we click on add, we specify the name of a category and then its color. So the display value will say, when you click something like delete, give us the name of that particular category. So that's what is usually specified in relation to that. So what will be here on the categories table will be the name. Let's go to next. The alpha chooser setting helps by activating a filter based on alphabets of a particular field in the table. For example, one is able to list all records starting with A or a B. Now an alpha chooser, for example, the alpha chooser is this. This is CFF, and then this is a column chooser here. On the running application, on the contacts where we're showing our fake data, if we choose F here, it shows Fs. If we choose PS, it shows S. So this is the alpha chooser. So when we're saying that it is active, it means that we need to show it here. The information that is here is fake data. Okay. Let's continue with our tour. Next. This gives an opportunity to specify which field in the table should be used for the alphabet filter. Yeah, which is the column shows. For example, we want the first letter of a name to be shown here. That's why we see C and things like that. So here we specify that field. Next. A column chooser is an option to show column names to show or hide in a table listing. We have explained this. These here are the columns. So that's the column chooser where you can click a table to show or hide it. A column to show or hide it, sorry. The use table setting tells the low-code generator that our app will have a table listing. Basically means that there will be a table like this that is generated. Like for example, on categories, it just indicates that generate a table like this for us to enter our information. And then next, this setting indicates that a modal dialog will be used. One can use a preference dialog, a bottom drawer as other options. In our running example, a modal is shown whenever a category is opened, it's added or edited. So what was that saying was use a modal, generate modal dialog code. And then yes, with a modal card, a modal can act as a card component, thus being embedded or shown as part of the user interface. Modals are usually hidden until shown. If you remember in the first tutorial, we had a bottom card where the contacts were shown sliding up from the bottom. And then what we did was to use a modal, but as a modal card to make sure that that information is embedded within that particular component. Next, one may decide to use a preference this, for example, what you should see here is a modal dialog. So what has happened is you can choose to use the modal dialog, you can choose to use the preference dialog depending on the need of what you want to do. Next, this is an additional feature to ensure that the preference dialog is working inside that row. For example, when we click the add table, it's lit from the right and showed, so it's inside the right drawer. So that's what that option does. Next, if you want your user interface to use a bottom drawer, activate this option. This drawer will slide from the bottom to show your user interface. Okay. Next, if you want your user interface to take the full screen, activate this option. This is useful when your user has a lot of input components. For example, when your user interface has a lot of input components, we can make it take the full area of the screen in the model. I think I did explain this earlier on. Next, inline edit is useful when you want to have a table inline editing. Inline editing ensures your table has input components. However, it's memory intensive and should be used sparingly. Okay? Input components, like for example in this particular table here, you see that there are checkboxes there. So those checkboxes are input components. And then one can use an API key for their projects. I will explain that further. Next, now when done, you need to save the table. Okay? Next, and then let's click cancel so that we can explore and already define the table. Okay, cancel. So as I've already indicated, this table here is listing our tables that we have on our project. But now we're just exploring the functionality via the guide using the address book project. This guide has been built to take you through with the address book project. Let's show a singular column in the table. Please click here. Let's click there, the singular table. And then this will then ensure that this column is displayed on the table listing. Remember that column was hidden. Now because we clicked it and it has a check mark, now it's shown. So next, let's show the plural column in the table. Please click here. Okay, there we go. The plural column gets to be displayed on the table listing. Next. So what we're demonstrating here is how the column choosers work, because it's able to activate and deactivate columns in our tables now. From this table definition, this table will have so our low-code generator is, because we're saying that it must use a table, it will generate table related code. Next. Also, this table will use a model for input components for the generator. See? This basically means that when you are creating this user interface, generate this particular table, generate the code to handle the click of the add button, generate the code to handle the click of the edit button, and to show the model and all sorts of other things. So this is just giving the LowCode generator guide to say, we want that particular code to be generated and that particular code to be generated. Next, let's click edit for this table to see its table definition. So what we're going to do is to look in terms of how the categories table has been defined. So let's click edit. Now, as usual, the preference dialog is activated, but because we are in edit mode, it shows the definition of that particular table. So if you go to next, we have created a table called categories. So this will store a list of categories. For example, on the running project, this is how the categories are displayed. Next, a single item in the categories table will be called a category. Okay, we already know that. A collection of items will be called categories. Do you see this working when you click here? You see saying add a category. It's using that singular here. Edit a category. So it's picking that text that is specified there and putting it here. So that is how basically it works. For example, refresh categories. It's picking that from the plural. Okay, the plural that we have specified here. Okay, next. We have defined a height of 600 pixels for the modal dialog for this table. A width of 700 pixels for the modal has been also specified. The reason that we specified as a width of 700 and a height of 600 pixels because we wanted this to be as this wide. And then 600 pixels is coming from there until there. The reason for that is because when we specify the color, it draws up the color wheel here, which takes its own space. So we needed the model to be a little bit larger so that it takes that into consideration. Let's close the color picker and do this. Like for example on edit, so we're editing sales, we're changing the color to be something else, and then we click on save. The category has been saved, and then it changes the color to be something else here. So next, we select the primary key for each row for the table, and it will be ID. So each row will have a unique ID. So it is the primary key that identifies that on this particular table, these are the fields that we currently have. The display value, as we indicated, is the name. When we delete this category, this is the name that will be displayed, okay? And then let's click cancel so we can continue to explore the next process of the table. As you can see with the guide, we have defined a table, called it categories. We have shown how that works with the running application. And now the next step is to create the various fields. So step 1, we created a project. Step 2, we created the tables in the project, which are these ones listed here. Step 3 is to create fields. So what we're going to do now is to show you how other fields of the particular categories table are created. So on the categories row, we go and click tables. And then this takes us to this particular screen. Sorry, I said tables, is actually fields. As you remember, there are 3 fields here: ID, name, color. As you can see, when we're adding categories here, there is name and color, and one of them is not shown here. So you see the name title here and the color title here. These are derived from this particular column here. So we're going to through the guide now for the fields in relation to how do the fields work. So I've tried to make this as simple as possible so that at least you get a feel in terms of how does the low code tool work for this particular simple task of creating a category screen. Okay, so let's start the tool again. Okay, fields tool. Now, the table fields define what kind of data a table can store. Now, each field or column represents a specific attribute or property of data that is being stored. Like for the categories, we're storing ID, the name, and the color. Next. Now, to add a new field to our table, you can click the Add button. Let's click the Add button so that we see what is required when we do that. So the preference dialog for this particular field is now activated. Okay, next. Now, the position defines how input components linked to the field should be added to the user interface. As you saw in this particular screen, the first item is name, the second item is color. This is the same as the sequence of what is here. The position is 01, 02, 03. So that is basically what will that say. Next, the component allows one to define what type of input component will be used. For example, there are a variety of input components that we can use. Avatars, buttons, cameras, and all sorts of other things. But for our example here, we have used a text field or a text box, and we have used a color wheel here. Okay, let's go back. Next. Now, here one specifies the name of the field. This should not have spaces, special characters, or underscores. Okay, next. The title defines the label of the field for input components and the column header in a table listing from your table. Like for example, the title that we saw here is name and color. Also on the table itself, there's name. The color, you see it as a badge and then as a name here. Okay, well, I'll tell you how that was done. Next. A field needs to have a data type. So this is the kind of value to be, it indicates the kind of value that needs to be stored. It can be a whole number, a date, true or false, or a file. So the data types that are available there are there, Boolean, data, datable, etc., etc. Okay. Next. One can define the length of the data to store per row in the field. So basically we can say that the name must be 20 characters long, etc., etc. Next. This is a representation of the actual data to guide users on what must be entered, like a placeholder. Okay, it just will indicate that type your name here, enter your address here, and all sorts of other things. Okay, let's go to next. Default value. This is the value that will automatically be assigned if a user does not enter anything in that box. Okay, next. The row defines the row position of the input component in a grid system. We're using a grid system in relation to this particular model. So this is on row 1, this is on row 2. The way that we see it here, because the first row actually is hidden. So this is on row 2, this is on row 3. But because the first row is hidden, so it doesn't show, you know. So let's go to next. Excuse me. This defines the column position of the input components. We have said that like each row can have a space of about 12 columns inside it. So they were saying, for example, that must be on row 1, column 1. It basically means that it should span all the 12 spaces that are there. So when active, for example, the input component will be made compulsory. Like you can indicate that the information must be specified before the record is saved. So that is what that does. That's required. Next, the margin. An input component can have a margin. Basically, A says all the sides. It's a margin that will be applied on all sides. X, the left and the right part. So it's margin left, margin right. Y is margin top and margin bottom. Top is top, B is bottom, left is left, and right is right. So you can just type the values there for your margins. Padding. Padding is also acting like margins. So this is padding all. Now, for example, padding left, padding right, padding top, padding bottom for Y, top if you want to specify individual paddings. The maximum length. So this defines the maximum length of the input component. You say that limited to 50 characters. So it won't accept 51, it will just accept 50. Okay. And then the alignment can be left, right, and center. So usually leave it at left for default. Enabled. This is to help define whether the input component is enabled or not. So the input component can be disabled and can be enabled. So you can set that setting here for the initial display. This is to define whether the input component is read-only. So if it's read-only, one cannot type anything in it. Next, order by. When listing records from the database, do they need to be sorted by this field? So, for example, on our categories, we've said that you must sort it by. So that's why you see BELS here, because it's sorted by the name. So that is what basically is helping us by defining this thing here. Next. In the database, should the field be unique? Yes, for example, category names. Each category name should be unique. We do not want any duplicates to be available for categories. Next, whether the input component should receive focus or not. So that we want to focus on the name when the modal is opened, as an example. The column type. Now, in a listing of records from the table, how should the data in the column be displayed? Like, it can be normal date, money, etc. So you can specify the type of display that you want to use for the data. For example, if you want to display an avatar because the information that you've stored there is a file, a badge, a button, a checkbox, and things like that. For example, as you can see here in this particular table, these are text boxes. So the column type that was used here, for example, was text box. Let me see. The text box. We said that when you're listing the information that is there, because it's an input, use that, for example. Okay. Next, whether the column should be a vertical aligned or not. Next, define which field should be used as a subtitle one value when to displaying the content. I will explain that with the color when we get to it. And then define whether the field should be used as subtitle true value when displaying. Okay, I'll also explain that one. The color. And then when all is done, you click apply. And then let's go to next. And then let's just cancel this because we were just going through the fields that are there. Okay, to show you how the vertical alignment works, if you see here on these column headers, these are vertically aligned and these ones are horizontal. So this is what was indicating in terms of how to place them. Now let's look in terms of some of the fields that are here. Let's look at the ID. So we click on the ID there. Okay. Now this is the table definition of the IDs. In column 01, position, it's a text box, it's an ID, there's the title, it should be a string on row 1 and 1, It's a required field, and all sorts of other things. Okay, let's go to next. Okay, we're done checking this one. We cancel. Yeah. Now the second one that we want to check is the name. Let's go and click on the name. So if you look at the properties of the name, it's a text box component that we need to use. The field is the name, the title is name, is a string, it's in 2.1, and then it's a required, and then selected one is enabled. We want it to be used for ordering. It should be unique, and it should receive focus. And we don't want it to display on the table listing, because that's why we're saying that it's none here. Okay, next. Let's cancel this one. Now let's look at the color. Let's click edit to see the color definition. Okay. Now if you see here, the color field, it uses a color wheel component. You remember that when we were using this, and then we selected the color here, it shows the color wheel. So that's what it's saying here. So for that color, use that color wheel component. So in 3.1 is required, and then the definition of the color wheel here, it should be sitting at bottom end. And then the column type, what we're saying here, it should be a color, but the subtitle should be the name. So that is why you are able to see the listing showing like this. The color is a hex number, there it is, but then the subtitle is the name. Okay. So with display badge and then the name. So that's what that subtitle field is actually indicating. Next. Okay, the column type for the field is color. This will show a badge with the color and the label. I've already showed you that. And then here we define which column should be used for the label and the color display. I've already showed you that. And then let's continue with the tool. Let's click on cancel. Now, what we want to do is to show the column type on the table listing. Click there. And then fake type, when we're generating the fake data, we need to choose what kind of fake data to generate. Let's click there. Now, whether the input component is visible or not, let's click there. And whether it's going to be ordered by, whether it must receive focus, and whether it's unique, and whether the column on the table is visible, and then we just hide this particular position. Okay. Now, for this table, we have 3 fields that have been defined: ID, name, and color, as we have seen. Next. We also gave each field a title. This title will be used for input components and table headings when the listing of the categories. You have already seen that. Yeah? The name is there, and then when you go to your edit, the name is there, the color is there. Or when you go to your category, the name is there, the color is there. So that is basically the information that is defined here, as you can see. Okay. Next. The data type, each field will store a string or a text, okay, in relation to the information that is here. We want the information to be stored like that. I will show you the database as we go on. The component, now we've already indicated that for these, we use the text box and then the color wheel. The ID and the name will use a text box, whilst the color will use a color wheel. We've displayed that in our example. The column type. When listing categories in the table, do not show the ID and the name columns, thus they are none. For the color field, show the color component on the table, which is basically the color component will be made of the badge and then the title as displayed earlier on. Next, When we're generating fake data for testing purposes, what type of data should we generate for each of the fields? I'm going to show you this. Next, rows. On our model dialog, place the input components one after another on row 1, 2, 3, as you can see here. Next, on the dialog, place the input component so that they take the whole row. That's why you are seeing here that when you click add, the name takes the whole space there. Okay. Next, we have indicated that the ID and the name and the color are required. They are compulsory. That's why when you go to this, you see these red dots. Okay? They are compulsory, they are required. So we flag them that the system must not save anything that should not be required. Visible. The input components in this particular case, except the ID, are visible. So that's why you see a checkbox there. And also on the categories, you see the name and the color. They are visible, but the ID is not visible. Okay. And then it's active. Basically, it means that this must be used to generate the user interface code. Okay. Next. When listing categories, sort them by the content of this particular field, which is basically sorted by name. You'll remember in the table listing of the categories, I showed you that it was sorted by name, starting from D. Next, focus on when the model is shown, set the mouse focus to be on the name text box. Okay, so we tell it that it should do that. Next, we have set a unique value for the name because the categories should not have the same names. Okay, so all the columns should not be visible except the color column. That is why on the listing you only see the color column and then the name because we have defined it like that. For example, if we're adding beneficiary here, we are as a new item completely, and then we give it a color and save it, the system is not going to allow us because we have said that the category name must be unique. So it's going to say a record with the matching name already exists, cannot proceed. So the LowCode generator, when you have set up that particular setting, it adds code to make sure that it checks that the name cannot be duplicated. Okay, so that is what that particular setting is doing. Okay, and then next. Now let's see how the categories design will appear like when it's a real application. Click here. So what we're going to do now is we have specified the fields that we want to create. We have specified the fake data that we want to create. Now what this does is to show us how our application will look like. So by clicking this, it's going to generate a representation of how our data will look like using fake data. So we have specified that we should show the color, and we have specified that the subtitle for the color is the name and show the badge. And then we have specified that we use a model. The model should be a particular width and height. And then we say that it should have the name and the color wheel. So basically what we are seeing here is basically the real application here, but using fake data on the other side, because what we decided was to say that have functionality within the low-code designer to show you how your application will look like before you actually create it and deploy it. Because the same thing that you see here in terms of the listing, the edits, the deletes, the width of the things and how it's going to work, add category, delete, it's exactly the same in terms of what is here, but what is here is an actual running application. So And let's go to the next page and all sorts of other things. So with the low-code designer tool, you are able to design a project, create tables, create fields within the tables, and then specify in terms of what fields are supposed to be there, and the look and the feel of your particular table listing, the look and the feel of your modal, and all sorts of other things. So I wanted to take you through the whole guide in relation to how did we eventually arrive at having an application like this, but just focusing on the categories. Now, what I'm going to do is, remember that PocketBase is running here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open the back end where this information is stored. So let's click on that. So this is the back end. Remember the login details that I showed you when we started on the project. So we use it to log in here. So this is basically this admin@admin.com. Okay. So we use the same login details that were there. Now our information is stored in this particular database. Remember, we created about 3 tables: categories, contacts, and provinces. So these tables are here. Categories, where our information is stored at, contacts, and then provinces. Remember, the information that is in this is fake data. So beneficiary emergency lawyer says, this is basically what you're seeing here. And then this is the color coordinates based on the information that is stored here. You know, remember the color, the name, the ID. Basically, for categories, if we go to fields, we said we want to create an ID field, a name, and a color. So these are translated in relation to this particular database here. All right. And then when we save the information, for example, here, you see now there's no, there's just 4. Let's add a new one here. Let's add a new thing here. And testing. Okay. And say yes. It's saved. And testing. Let's go to our database, refresh, and testing. There it is. So what I've shown you now is the front end and the back end in terms of how the information is stored. Okay. Now let's do this. Let's delete and testing. Yes. And go to our database, let's refresh, and testing is not there. If you want to update, let's say this one is beneficiary 100. We clicked on edit and that, and then there it is, beneficiary 100. Okay, so that's how you would create this particular application like this using the low-code system. In the first tutorial that we did, I showed you everything in terms of how we created the categories and things, because what actually happens is at the end of the day, the source code that is being used for this particular application here, that what you see here is generated from here. So this is what happens when one clicks add, and this is what happens when we're building the fake data to add, building the modal. As you can see here, there's the name, there's the color wheel, you know, building the table in relation to the kind of columns that it should have. Okay. What happens when we click clone? What happens when we click edit? The validation of whether the information is valid or not. When it says, for example, if you click on add and then you click on yes, it says the name is required. So the code that is running to do that is basically this here. Check the ID is blank return, check the name is blank return, check the color is blank return. So you see in your application that it's saying that the name is required because this code here was executed. Okay. And then what happens when the person clicks a no button? No. So when a person clicks a no, is when a person clicks this particular no here, and then this is what it does, is to say that close the dialog, yeah, and then just reload everything. What happens when you click yes? Do a validation of the information, open the database. If a new record is being created, a record with the name exists. Remember, when we were adding a record here and we called it beneficiary, it said that there's a duplicate. So this particular code that is here is what is running here. And then when this is running is when we update. We change the name from beneficiary to beneficiary 100. The code that was running behind, that is this one. And then you saw a prompt that says the category has been saved. When we click save, for example, here, let's save this. The category has been saved. The code that is being executed is exactly this. What you see here, show a success rate, and then category has been saved with an OK. So which is basically, there's the OK, there's the success. Okay. And then when we're adding clear everything, when you're showing the page, execute this code. When you click add, show the model. When you click add, show the model, etc., etc. So I'm trying to take you through the process of the code that you see being generated by our low-code tool, and at the end of the day, what it does in the user interface, at the end of the day, what it does in the back end. So I took you through the process of doing categories, but the same principle will apply for the other tables. Now, in our first tutorial, we discussed a lot in relation to how to create this particular address book. Okay, and then I'm not going to repeat that here because that first tutorial is the basis of everything. This one was just to show you that now we have added a guide here that actually talks around the issues of creating a table, creating fields, creating a project. How does it look in relation to the back end? How does it look in relation to the front end? And all sorts of other things. So what we need to do also now is just to add some more functionalities to this, like for example your dashboards and things like that. I've also talked about creating dashboards in relation to this particular low-code tools, but then we will add a dashboard and then we'll take you through the process of actually doing that. But now, the very interesting thing about all of this is when we created this particular project in our first tutorial, what we used was Web SQL. Right? And this was saving information to the browser. This time around, we are using PocketBase, and the information that is being saved is saved in a back end here. Now, as you will see with the code that has been generated, the code is almost 99% the same with the other one that was saving with the browser, but the only thing that has been changed basically is just the connection parameters. The connection parameters in terms of saying that instead of using a browser database, use PocketBase. Okay, so if we go and look at the code, for example, we go and look at mount categories. Mount categories basically means that go to the categories database, open it, and then extract the information that is there and then list it on the table. So what has changed here compared to the one that's saved on the browser is basically this. Yeah. Okay. And then everything else is the same across the board, because what we wanted to do is to maintain the kind of structure of the code to make it as easy as possible to read. For example, if I can show you now, let's perhaps change the database type, okay, maybe to be Web SQL so that we can see what I'm talking about. Let's do this. Let's save this. The project has been saved. Let's go to tables. Let's go to categories, fields. Let's go to generate code. and see what is going to happen. Let's go to mount categories. You see here now, the code has changed. Dim DB, SQL Web, SQL, DB initialize, DB name, and categories, and everything that is here is the same. Because what I've done is to create classes that actually will work with the various databases, but if you change the database connection, then it just changes that particular code without having to rewrite everything. So this makes us to be able to port our application to any database that we'll be using here, so that it's easy without having to change the majority of the code that we have. So that's all that I wanted to show you today in relation to the tour guide of how it basically works. So what I'm going to be doing is to have all of this and PocketBase project will also available on the LowCode website, which is this one on GitHub. So I'm going to make it available here so that you can just go through here, because this is basically what is running on the internet. This one here. Okay. And then I'm going to put the source code there so that you also have it available here as part of this particular project. Okay. That is all. I have tutorials on before X in terms of how to work with PocketBase, in terms of how to do everything about it. So you'll have to go through that if you want to learn how to use it. But it's very, very simple to use. I like it so much because it just makes things very easy. Like, for example, for categories, this is how you create it. But our low-code tools, it automatically creates these collections and automatically creates the fields for it. You don't have to, because I want it to be like a fully seamless process that runs. Okay, so there it is. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this particular tour that we were doing today. I tried to explain as many things as possible. The good thing about this kind of tools is you learn by doing. So you have to explore the tool for yourself and find out what it does and all sorts of other things. Okay. The B4J project, of course, of this PocketBase is here. All of the code that is generated by the tool that you saw is basically here. I just came and copied and pasted it here. For example, this is bound categories. This is the same code that you saw there. So this is the same code that you saw there. So I just copied and pasted the code here, and then it just ran and followed the instructions in terms of how you do it. And then there are templates, for example, that I'll be adding here. For example, we have a ST5 LowCode banana SQL. So I'll be adding ST5 LowCode PocketBase here so that you have a template that's already running for you to create these particular applications here. So enjoy and have fun with this tool and be able to create more applications for you. And then we'll be talking again. Thank you.